To those of you joining us today, thank you for watching the Woburn Spotlight. I'm your host, Tyler Gates, here to bring some positivity by talking to those in town, making big strides for the greater good. Today I'm fortunate to have with me Nick Carter, who is going to be a candidate, or is a candidate, excuse me, for the Governor's Council. How are we doing, Nick?
Hey Tyler, I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. I know we just got to chat for a few minutes, and I got to get to know you a little bit before today's show, and I appreciate that. But do you mind just kicking it off for the viewers that don't know you or who Nick is? Just tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I'm 54 years old. I have two grown kids, Max and Isabel, who went through the Newton Public Schools. They're now out of college and starting their own lives. I'm married to Maria, who is she has an interesting story. But currently she's a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and a professor at Emerson, where she teaches the business of film. She has a very busy life. She's making a feature film about her life, loosely based on her life coming to the U.S. She's an immigrant to the U.S., was brought here at age 7. And I am a 25-year trial attorney. So I've been working in the Massachusetts courts for 25 years. I have a general civil litigation background, handle all kinds of disputes. Used to do a little bit of criminal defense work, so I've got some experience there as well. And I have concerns about the direction of the country. I think there's a lot of discord, there's a lot of concern about where the country is going. And I believe I can add value in this office. I believe very much in our courts, the value of our courts, the importance of our courts, and the justice system generally. And so given that I'm a lawyer and I work in the courts, I can add value here in this office, which they ultimately determine who our judges are, who our state court judges are. So I'm running for this office, the Governor's Council.
So I'm glad you led into that. So do you mind elaborating a little bit on the council? It's smaller numbers, right? 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, that's
please,
right.
Feel free to take it from there. Smaller,
sure.
And the dynamic is essentially to put judges in the right place.
Right. So what the Governor's Council does is they ultimately confirm all of our state court judges. So if you want to become a judge, you apply. You're vetted by a body of 21 lawyers who are appointed by the governor, called the Judicial Nominating Commission. They review your application. If you get the thumbs up from this body, you then are put into a pool from which the governor can make a nomination of your name to a court. So the governor would nominate one or more of the people who are in that pool. He doesn't have to, or she doesn't have to. But those nominees are then presented to the Governor's Council, this body that I'm running for, and no one gets on the court without the approval of the Governor's Council. So they ultimately determine who sits on our state courts. There are 400 state court judges, from juvenile courts, housing courts, up to, to our different trial courts, up to the Supreme Judicial Court, which is our highest court. And there are 8 counselors. Each counselor has a district that's an eighth of a state. Each district is comprised of 5 state senate districts. And so it's a large territory for what's called a down ballot office, relatively unknown, or I should say quite unknown, but very important because our courts are important. And so there are 8 counselors, and if there is a tie, 4 people are in favor of confirming, 4 against, the lieutenant governor breaks the tie. And so the lieutenant governor presides over the council hearings, which occur every week on a Wednesday. And so that's really how the process works.
Thank you for enlightening me. I might not be alone in wondering exactly how that dynamic is made up of. So
let me just tell you, I assure you that 99.9% do not know what the Governor's Council is. And when the funny thing is, running for this office, not only do I have to tell people who I am, but I have to explain what is this office I'm running for.
Well, good. Well, hopefully we could do you a little justice today.
Thank you.
No pun intended, by getting your message out there and what you're here to do and accomplish. So I'd love to dive in at some point to a little bit about what qualifies you for this position and some of the visions that you have. But before we go that route, do you mind just sharing what got you to the point of taking this big leap and running for office?
Well, I think regardless of your party affiliation, the country is, I would say, in crisis. There's a huge amount of discord, and in my view, a dangerous amount of discord. Now, in Massachusetts, perhaps the volume is lower, but when you look nationwide, it's very high, and that's a problem. And we need to somehow find a way to solve problems together, whether we're Republicans or Democrats. I think I'm a person who can do that and get along with people from, with all backgrounds. I pride myself on that. Now, I am a Democrat, so I do have a Democratic bent to the kinds of things I want to accomplish. But I'm also a listener and a problem solver, and I think that's what we need in this climate. So given that my kids are grown, I've got an opportunity to serve. That's what I want to do. I decided I want to serve. I looked for a way to do so, looked at this office and said, I can add value, and the person who's currently there, who's a 20-year incumbent, I don't think is doing a good job, and in any event, has served for 20 years, and that's, in my view, in her case, long enough. So I decided to run.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed the process. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you have to be a little bit of you have to enjoy it to do this, because
Yeah, absolutely.
you're doing things that a lot of people don't like to do. So the last couple of weeks, I've been out on subway platforms, bus platforms, coming up to strangers over and over and over again, introducing myself. Nobody wants to talk to a stranger on the subway platform or bus platform heading to work. You got to do it, and in fact, people are nice. You don't take up too much of their time, give a little 20, 30-second snippet of what you're doing, and they appreciate the information for the most part. If they really don't want to talk to you,
They'll tell you.
They know, and you move on quickly. So I've really enjoyed the process, and I think it's an important time for people to get involved.
I can agree in getting involved. It's a very important time in our society and community to get engaged. So tell me a little bit about your history as a trial lawyer and what strengths you'll be able to bring to the table if elected come this next Tuesday.
Yeah, so I've been a 25-year trial attorney. I first went to, just a little bit of background about my educational experience. So I went to Harvard College, and then, in fact, I met my wife there. And then went to Boston College Law School and clerked for a federal judge right after law school, a man named Judge David Mazzoni. Now that was an amazing experience because Judge Mazzoni was an amazing guy, a very decent, honorable person that everybody loved. One of the things he did that was incredible was he ordered the Boston Harbor cleanup. This was back in the I think early 1980s or mid 1980s, and this was because the Boston Harbor at that time was in violation of an environmental law, the Clean Water Act, a federal law. And he agreed that it was in violation. He ordered the government to clean it up. Now that was a massive undertaking, hugely expensive, very time consuming, took literally decades to complete. When I was clerking for him, it was in the process of being built, being done. It involved huge engineering and construction, but the result of this was an environmental improvement of an enormous magnitude, which was the Boston Harbor, and our whole coast was cleaned up, our harbor was cleaned up, and an economic boom for the area, because when the harbor got cleaned up, people wanted to be on the harbor. And so now we have the boom of the Seaport District, and you have restaurants and people and businesses who want to be in Boston, new businesses coming in because Boston's more vibrant now, in, I think, large part due to the cleanup of the Boston Harbor. So for me, it was an amazing example of how a court can impact the environment, and we've got serious environmental issues right now, and at the same time, these environmental projects can be economically very profitable and very important for the region's economy. So I don't think we should fight environmental solutions. They can really be a very big positive for the economy. And the courts have a big role to play there. So after that 1 year clerking for this Judge Mazzoni, I then went into practice, had young kids, needed to raise a family, so I was working in a large law firm. Then I started at the firm I'm at now, which is Todd & Weld. It's a general litigation firm. We're 50 attorneys. We work throughout the state of Massachusetts and beyond, but mostly it's focused in Massachusetts courts and federal courts. And I've got a very broad general litigation background. I work in all the courts, from the lower trial court, the district court, mostly the superior court, which is our higher court, in the appeals court, the SJC, and also federal courts. So, the range of cases is employment discrimination. I've got defamation cases, real estate cases, cases involving probate disputes where family members get some elderly relative to change their estate plans right at the end of life, and then there's a dispute over, was that valid or coerced? Business disputes, a whole range of things, and I really view my career as being a problem solver. That's what I think will help me be effective as an elected official, because I understand about how to solve problems, bring people together, solve conflict, get to a goal that is constructive. And two, important from my experience, is I know the courts. So the Governor's Council primarily is focused on making judges. And you need to know what judges do to understand who should be on the court. You need people who have trial experience. You need people who are hardworking. You also need people who can learn, because when you are a new judge, for the most part, you come at it either with a civil litigation background or a criminal litigation background, as a prosecutor or a criminal defense attorney. You don't usually have one attorney combining both, and they have to learn the other. So there's a huge amount of learning that goes on, and you have to understand, is the person able to learn the other discipline? You obviously need integrity. We do not want judges in any way who give even the appearance of impropriety. You need people who are beyond reproach in terms of, their professional integrity. So you really need to know what goes into making a good judge and what makes a bad judge, because I've certainly have been before some bad judges. And do your very best to ensure we have the highest quality judges in our courts.
Okay, so I want to take a second to talk about the area that you would serve in the event that you're victorious on Tuesday. So you said it is divided up by 8 regions?
Yes.
For each of the individual counselors?
Right.
What representation would you have at that point?
Sure. So first of all, each counselor represents the entire Commonwealth effectively, because you are overseeing all the courts,
okay,
and all the courts are throughout the Commonwealth. By the way, this body also confirms clerk magistrates who run our local district courts throughout the Commonwealth, and for parole board members who oversee parole throughout our Commonwealth. But each counselor does respond to and are ultimately held accountable by their constituents, and each district is an eighth of the state, 5 state Senate districts. My district includes Woburn. It includes, which is part of State Senator Cindy Friedman's Senate district, and she's endorsed me. It includes State Senator Michael Barrett's district, and his district includes places like Concord, Lincoln, Lexington, several other towns, Chelmsford. He's endorsed me, and then it also includes Jamie Eldridge's Senate district, Will Brownsberger's Senate district, which goes into Boston, and State Senator Cindy Cream's district, which is Brookline, Newton, and part of Wellesley.
Okay.
So my district goes from part of Boston all the way up to Westboro and Northborough in Worcester County, up to Chelmsford, and down to Newton and Brookline, it literally takes an hour to drive east-west without traffic.
Yeah. Which there's always traffic.
Yeah, there's often traffic. I mean, this morning, campaigning, I went out to Acton. No traffic going west at that hour, but it took me half an hour to go to Acton from Newton, a little bit more, and that's halfway across my district. And by the way, the traffic coming in was an utter nightmare. I thought, oh my gosh, living out here.
It's almost laughable when you're going the other direction.
That is a major problem we have to solve, is transportation. But that is actually outside the Governor's Council jurisdiction.
One step at a time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That leads me to a great point. What vision do you have for your chance at office? Is this where you want to be? Do you see yourself, as you've experienced some of the political scene, looking to move forward from there? I'm not sure what this role is. Again, please enlighten us there.
Sure. So I'm focused on our courts and our justice system. We've actually just passed a really important criminal justice reform law on a bipartisan basis. So Republicans and Democrats came together, Charlie Baker signed it. It has some great reforms. Some of them, and I want to continue that.
Okay.
That what I would call criminal justice reform effort, because let me just say that one of the things that we did as part of this criminal justice reform bill, this legislation, is to reduce the number of mandatory minimum sentences. These are sentences that the legislature decides in advance. If you commit X crime, you are going to do a mandatory minimum amount of time for that crime, and it's already in the law books. The judge has no flexibility, no discretion. Now, what ended up happening is, as a result of all these mandatory minimums, people were getting incarcerated at very large numbers for very long periods of time, and our prison population was growing. And it really all began with the war on drugs back in the early 1980s. Under President Reagan, sort of nationwide, everybody started to get concerned. Everybody jumped on board, including Massachusetts, more and more mandatory minimums. And what ended up happening is poorer communities, especially communities of color, ended up taking the brunt of these mandatory minimums. So they were getting incarcerated at much higher rates than others in our Commonwealth, which led to really significant disparities and very, I think, harmful impacts on those communities where so many people were being incarcerated for so long and then dealing with a criminal record. So I think everybody on a bipartisan basis realized we gotta try something different here, especially for nonviolent offenses where some of these crimes are generated due to drug addiction problems that we know a lot of folks are struggling with, or mental illness issues. We've got to find a way to treat people, do something other than incarceration, because we found incarceration does not work when you're dealing with addiction or mental illness, and it's very expensive. It costs $60,000 a year to incarcerate somebody in Massachusetts, and if you're doing no good, then you are just spending money holding that person. They get out and they come right back in. Yeah. And then you're spending another $60,000 on that person, and in the meantime, you're preventing that person from being a family person or getting a job. We've got to find a way to make people productive members, not just incarcerate and then have them in and out of the system as an inmate. It doesn't do anyone any good, and it's expensive. So one of the goals I have, since we've reduced the number of mandatory minimums, we've now given discretion to judges. That's really the effect. So we haven't solved the problem. We've said we're now going to give discretion to the judges on these sentences. We need to make sure we have the right judges. And the goal is to try to find ways to make people constructive members of our community, not simply to incarcerate everybody for nonviolent offenses. That's a tricky task. We need people with good judgment who can exercise that discretion and try to move folks toward effective treatment so that we can end this cycle of excessive incarceration. That's one of the goals I have. Another goal is, so I go into court, I'm an attorney, and I'm a white guy. Most people in authority look like me. Well, that's fine, except I'm also somebody who realizes I can see the other side of the equation. It wouldn't be okay if you weren't a white guy. My wife comes from South America. She was brought here by her mother at age 7. Wasn't my wife's choice to come here, but she came here just because you come as a child, your parent says, this is where we're going. She is Latina and has done very well here in school and as a professional, and is contributing a lot to our community. But I know from her experience of being here that there's discrimination. I think we all know that there is racism. We have racial conflict that's going on. I mean, even at the NFL level, taking a knee has become a huge controversy. There's a lot of racial issues that we got to deal with and resolve, and I see that playing out in our courts. That in Massachusetts, we consider ourselves an enlightened, advanced state, a leader in many respects, and our courts are not leading on this important national issue, which is to try to find a way to bring everybody into the community, everybody contribute, and everybody work together productively. We're not doing that now, and I want to work on that and try to increase the level of fair representation in our courts.
Couple big goals for yourself.
Yeah.
Might as well stay busy, right?
That's it. So, and I think these will lead to a lot of dialogue, I hope, because these are difficult issues for a lot of people to talk about, and it's hard to talk about, and we're having trouble nationally talking about it, but we have to have these conversations, and we need to do it in Massachusetts. I want us to be a leader and to help solve this problem that our country has. And I think, in my view, ultimately, our country is made great by the huge diversity of our country. People come from everywhere in the world to be here. It's what's made us great. And our strength is going to be continuing to bring in people from different backgrounds, as we've done throughout our history in the United States. And is it easy? No, it's not. When the Irish came, they were given a hard time. When other communities came, the Jews, they were given a hard time. We are still wrestling with other groups who are more recent arrivals, and we're going to wrestle with these problems, but we have to keep trying, and I think we've been strengthened by the generations after generations who've come to the U.S., have worked hard and made our country a great country. So I'm really proud to be an American, but I see we've got more work to do, and I want to be part of that. Let me tell you one thing about my family. I mentioned before we started. So I have an interesting connection to Woburn. The first person in my family settled in Woburn. His name was Thomas Carter. And Thomas Carter is a well-known name in Woburn. There's a very large painting of him in the Woburn Library. He's the first minister in Woburn, and he's being ordained. And it's an enormous picture. The library is now under construction, so this painting's been moved. But it's an enormous painting of the elders with their hands on him. He's being ordained as the first minister for Woburn. And that's my first ancestor who came to the U.S. So I feel like, I feel this great connection to Woburn. And this person, Thomas Carter, immigrated to the U.S., was part of the Great Migration and people wanting religious freedom, the ability to exercise their religion, free from the king or the pope. They had their own religion and they wanted the freedom to exercise it. People come to the U.S. for so many different reasons, and it's just a wonderful thing, and we have to keep working at it.
I know you have some big goals, and keeping with the tie to Woburn, if there's anyone listening today that really wants to reach out, say hello, or can just get behind what you're trying to accomplish, Do you mind speaking to the importance of this primary coming up? Because if I'm correct, and you saying earlier, there's no Republican candidate, no independent.
That's right.
So this is the big show.
Yeah, that's right. So, I'm running against a 20-year incumbent, and I thank her for her service. But I think it's now time for a change, and there are others who agree with me. So I took a leap of faith when I ran for this office, didn't know if I'd be able to raise any money, didn't know if anybody would support me, and I was able to raise some money, and I got a lot of endorsements. So I've been endorsed by the last 4 attorneys general, including our current attorney general, Maura Healey. I've been endorsed by the last 4 Middlesex County district attorneys. We're in Middlesex County. This is the top prosecutor for Middlesex County. All 4 of those last 4 Middlesex County district attorneys have endorsed me. There are many, many others who've endorsed me, like State Senator Cindy Friedman, who represents Woburn. The reason I'm getting so much support indicates people know it's time for a change. They believe I can manage and effectively represent our district on the important task of our courts and justice system because of my experience, because I'm a mature adult and I've raised kids and I've been through some life's ups and downs. It takes some judgment to evaluate people for an important job like being a judge. And I take the job very seriously. So I hope people will consider me on Tuesday, will vote for me. It's not easy to beat an incumbent in Massachusetts. I'm in a good position to do it, but I need people's support. So I hope that they will come out and support Nick Carter for Governor's Council.
Well, Nick, I really appreciate our time together. Our time's wrapping up here, but I do want to give you the floor if you want to speak to viewers directly, tell them how to get a hold of you, whatever it may be. Yeah. The floor is yours.
Yeah. So, Tyler, what I would tell folks to contact me and to do homework about me, because it's important to do that, please go to my website, which is nickcarter.org. You're welcome to call me, which is 617-686-8169. My email is nickcartercampaign@gmail.com. I'm very responsive. We've got 1 week to go until this election is decided. It's for a very important office, though really not well known. Shaping and determining our courts and justice system. I think I can do a good job, and I would ask people to vote for me on Tuesday, September 4th. Thank you very much.
Well, Nick, thank you for joining us today. Glad to share your message a little bit around Woburn, and best of luck to you come Tuesday.
Tyler, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed it.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks very much.
And thank you all for watching today's show with Nick Carter. Remember, we all have one life to live. Let's all do our part. I'm your host, Tyler Gates. Join us again next time for another episode of the Woburn Spotlight.